Welcome, folks. We'll get started here in the next minute or two since we've got a packed agenda. Richard, I'm going to take us live a couple minutes early. All right. Hi, folks. Welcome to this 19th meeting of the Public Safety Advisory Committee. We are going to get started here in just a minute, so stand by. All right, folks, it is 5 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started with tonight's meeting and cover our admin items. So welcome again to the 19th meeting of the Public Safety Advisory Committee for Metro. We are going to kick it off with a few accessibility announcements. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Thompson.
Thanks so much, Richard. We will be offering Spanish translation during this meeting. I'll turn it over to Elizabeth to share those instructions at this point. Elizabeth?
Buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a la reunión número 19 del Comité Asesor de Seguridad Pública de Metro. El día de hoy estaremos ofreciendo interpretación al español. Si usted se está conectando a través de tableta o teléfono inteligente, puede seleccionar la opción de More, que tiene 3 puntitos. Después le va a aparecer, el siguiente paso va a decir Language Interpretation, que significa interpretación de idioma. Y después va a seleccionar Spanish como su idioma. Esto va a ser una vez que yo dé todas las instrucciones. En este momento no lo va a ver. En cuanto yo termine de dar las instrucciones, lo va a poder ver. En su computadora va a aparecer, una vez que termine de dar las instrucciones, un globo que parece el globo terráqueo, que dice Interpretation. Van a seleccionar ese para que sea interpretación. Y el siguiente paso va a ser que seleccione el idioma, que es el español. Muchas gracias y buenas tardes.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Next slide, please. We'll also be offering ASL interpretation during this meeting. As a recommendation, it is best viewed on the Zoom computer platform. Additionally, for technical assistance, the chat will be open through agenda item number 1. Next slide. Finally, we will be taking public comments during this meeting. In order to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature that's available on the computer as well as the mobile platform. If you're dialing in by phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. Comments will be taken in the order that they are received. Additionally, we'll be taking written comments direct through the chat box. So at public comment time, I will go ahead and open up that chat box. We just ask that you submit your comment in one message, and we'll go ahead and read it aloud to the group. Finally, as a reminder to our PSAC members today, we just ask that you make all chats public by going down to the gray drop-down menu in chat and selecting everyone so that participants can see your chats as well. Next slide, please. Back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Thompson. All right, tonight's agenda, we've got a lot of things to cover. So we'll wrap up our call to order here and then open it up to public comment, and then we will dive into the discussion for tonight. First up is going to an item that we tabled during our last meeting. So we'll be circling back to the Infrastructure Protection Services recommendation regarding firearms. That's going to be a very quick discussion. So committee members just want you all to be prepared to run through that rather quickly. Then we plan on spending the bulk of tonight's discussion considering the Policing Practices Ad Hoc Committee's recommendations regarding the multi-agency policing contract. Metro has shared their responses to the committee's recommendations, so we will give you all some time to review those, and then we'll open it up to Q&A before hopefully moving to a vote on those recommendations. After that, we will get through public comment before we wrap for the night at 7 o'clock. So that's the plan. Move to the next slide. All right, in our call to order, let us start out with a roll call. And we're doing alphabetical tonight. So Andrea, you're first up.
Here.
Thank you. Ashley.
Here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Carrie.
Here.
Thanks, Carrie. Charles. We'll circle back to Charles. Chauncey.
Here.
Thank you, Chauncey. Clarence.
Present.
Thank you, Clarence. Constance.
Present.
Thank you, Constance. Daryl.
Bill's running about 15 minutes late.
Thank you, Thompson. Esteban.
Here.
Thank you. Florence.
Here.
Thank you, Florence. Glenda.
I'm here.
Thank you, Glenda. James. Circle back to James. Jessica.
Present.
Thank you, Jessica. Jose.
Here.
Thank you, Jose. Mayan.
Here.
Thank you, Mayan. Marisela. Circle back to Marisela. Mohammed. Circle back to Mohammed. Raul. Dr. Howard. All right, and Scarlett.
Here.
Thank you, Scarlett. Okay, circling back to Charles. Circling back to James. Circling back to Daryl.
Here.
Thank you, Daryl. Marisela. Mohammed. Raul. Dr. Howard. All right, that takes care of roll call. And our last administrative item, approving our meetings from our January 5th meeting 2 weeks ago. we'll go through a modified process here. So the proposal in front of you all is to approve these meeting minutes, and moving to a test for is the discussion about that proposal. Okay, testing for consensus. Are there any concerns about approving the meeting minutes from January 5th? All right, hearing none, let us move to a vote. Are there any no votes for approving these meeting minutes? Hearing none, are there any abstentions for approving these meeting minutes? All right, then voting members present, all vote yes, and those meeting minutes are approved. And with that, we've wrapped up call to order. Let's move over to public comment. I'll turn it over to Thompson.
Thanks, Richard. So we'll be taking general public comment right now. Attendees, if you would like to give public comment, just go ahead and use the raise hand function if you are on a computer platform or on mobile. If you are calling in via phone, just dial *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. We will also be taking written comments at this time in the chat box. That chat box should be open to all participants of the meeting. So just give me one moment to get our timer up on screen. It looks like we have currently one commenter in chat. We'll start with commenter Mares. Commenter Mares, please come off mute. You have a minute for your comment.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lionel. I frequently use the Metro subway to get to downtown LA or, Venice Beach, Santa Monica Beach, or other parts of the county. And for the past year, I've been actively participating in the Public Safety Advisory Committee. And every time when I hop in on the Metro, there's trash, it's filthy, and I don't see nobody from Metro doing anything about cleaning up. If I do, it's very rare. And I've also witnessed people with mental crisis, psychosis, and they're yelling. Sometimes they get into people's faces because I understand they have a mental distress, and we need somebody on the bus because people are afraid. I analyze people's faces and they look terrified, but there's nothing I could do because I'm not a big guy. So we need more counselors, somebody.
Thank you, commenter Mares. Last call for public comment. Last call for general public comment. Okay, no more commenters in queue. Richard, back to you.
All right. Okay, so let's move into our discussion here. And the first thing that we're considering is the Infrastructure Protection Services firearms recommendation. So as you all will remember, last week or 2 weeks ago, we tabled this discussion just to give the committee some more time to consider it. So on the next slide here, you will see what those options were. Option 1, to reduce armed IPS personnel gradually. And then option number 2 was to eliminate armed IPS personnel as part of the next contract. And so we can move along to the next slide since we covered that in detail. For tonight's discussion, the plan is to really move pretty quickly on this. So in the last 2 weeks, we have sent out a survey to all of the committee members. So thank you to all of you who replied and shared your feedback to get an understanding of where everybody stood on this issue and to inform today's discussion. I'll be going over those in a minute. For that survey, think of it more as a temperature check. It's not a vote, it's nothing binding, but it helps inform our discussion tonight. And I think the last thing is we kind of need to move through this pretty quickly so that we can start talking about the multi-agency policing contracts. So we got 25 minutes slated for this discussion. In order to manage time, we're actually going to use our one-timer for the discussion on this item for our committee members as well, just to make sure that everyone who wants to chime in on this has the ability to and to make sure we're kept on track. So fair warning there. So let's get into what we found on the survey results on the next slide here. So there were 15 respondents, a very bare majority, 8 of 15 supported option number 1, a gradual reduction, and the rest of the committee supported option number 2. So clearly there's a split here, but again, for information purposes, slim majority supported option 1. We can move to the next slide and just round out these survey results. So the next thing is that we also asked folks if they'd be willing to stand aside as part of our consensus process if their preferred option wasn't the one that the committee picked. And so after consulting with folks, 100% of the respondents agreed to moving this forward to a vote. You'll see there that some of those boxes are in lighter orange, and those are folks who initially said that they would prefer not to stand aside, but we clarified with each of those individuals that that does not mean that you cannot vote no, or that you cannot pick your preferred option. It's just that you would not stand in the way of bringing the item to a vote for the committee. So it looks like there's unanimity or near unanimity on moving this forward. And then also with the understanding that there will be an ability to write an alternative opinion or a dissenting opinion to share the other perspective with Metro and the board. 80% of folks who responded to that question were willing to take part in that process. So sounds like folks want to move forward, and there's also interest in crafting that dissenting opinion. So that's just kind of a snapshot of what we found over the last couple of weeks here, and we can move along to the next slide. So it'll be our standard decision-making process. This one we are focusing specifically on the firearms recommendation here. So we are going to start out with a very kind of curtailed discussion, just because we had a chance to begin it last week. Folks shared comments during the survey, and now we're kind of wrapping that up so that we can then move to a proposal. We'll test for consensus, modify if need to, and then finalize with a vote. So let's open it up to the discussion now. And again, folks, please feel free to raise your hand to get in queue from the committee members. But again, we'll limit y'all to 1 minute just to make sure that we're keeping things on track here. So any questions or comments or feedback from our committee members? Okay, okay. Hopefully folks have felt they've been able to share their piece and or get their point across to the committee. So let us move this then to the second part of our discussion process, which is public comment. And so I will turn it over to Thompson. This is public comment related to the firearms discussion for the Infrastructure Protection Services contract.
Thanks, Richard. So we will be taking public comment on this specific item. If there's any public comment on the IPS weapons recommendations, we'll be taking those now. Please use the raise hand feature to raise your hand if you're dialing in by phone. Please go ahead and dial *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself when called upon. Additionally, written comments can be received through chat. We just ask that you limit your comment to 1 message and it will be read aloud. Looks like we have 1 commenter in queue, commenter Soto. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and you have a minute for your comment.
Hello, this is Cindy Soto, and I've made comment on this item before, and I continue to feel that a gradual or measured a response to weapons is really the responsible and right way to go for safety of the personnel of Metro and for the public. Disability is, you know, intersectional, and so I'm not saying that, you know, that just one population would be served by this. It's anyone with any kind of disability. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commentator Soto. Okay, last call for public comment on this item. Okay, back to you, Richard.
All right, so the proposal before the committee is to move this item to a vote with the understanding that the majority vote getter will be PSAC's official recommendation. However, there will be an option to craft an alternate or dissenting opinion. So that is the proposal, and that is what we will move. Well, first, I'll ask if there are any competing proposal or anything else that folks want to put on the table. Okay, hearing none, then let's go ahead and check for consensus. So again, do you agree to bring the IPS ad hoc committee's proposal, or the two options that they laid forward, to a vote? And so I'll ask folks first if anyone has any concerns about bringing this item to a vote of the committee. Okay. Not hearing concerns, so I'm assuming that folks can either stand aside, will live with, or support this proposal to move forward with a vote. And so let's do that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide here, or the next couple of slides. There we go. So tonight it's not a yes, no, abstain vote. It is an option 1, an option 2, or an abstain vote. So you're either voting for option 1, which is a gradual reduction in the number of armed IPS personnel, or you're voting for option number 2, which is to disarm IPS personnel at the start of the new contract, or you're voting to abstain from the vote. Any questions about what folks are voting on, or clarifications on what tonight's vote is? Okay, Thompson, I will turn it over to you to do roll call on this one.
Thanks, Richard. So again, I'm going to go down the list in alphabetical order, and please, when your name is called, respond option 1, option 2, or abstain. Andrea?
I abstain.
Ashley?
Option 2.
Thanks, Ashley. Carrie?
Option 1.
Thanks, Carrie. Chauncey?
Option 2.
Thanks, Chauncey. Clarence? Clarence?
Abstain.
Okay. Constance?
Option 2.
Thanks, Constance. Daryl?
Option 1.
Thanks, Daryl. Esteban?
Option 1.
Thank you, Esteban. Florence?
1.
Thank you, Florence. James? No, James. Maricela? No, Maricela. Mayan?
Option 2.
Mohammed? No, Mohammed. Dr. Howard? No, Dr. Howard. Scarlett?
Option 2.
Thanks, Scarlett. Folks, just give me one moment to tabulate those votes. Okay, so Richard, we have 5 votes for option 2, 4 votes for option 1, and 2 abstentions, none of which reach a simple majority of PSAC voting members.
Okay. And I believe that we have some folks who I think are planning on attending the meeting, but might just not have joined us yet. You know what, for the sake of time, let's put this one aside and let's move into the policing practices discussion. We will log what we've got now, and time permitting at the end of this, we might circle back if more members join. That sound like a plan?
How many more votes are needed?
8 votes are required to reach a simple majority.
Okay, so we have 5 and 4. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and you can find that information in the charter for our procedures.
Okay, let's circle back and let's log that result, but we will circle back at the end of this meeting. But let's move into the policing contract recommendations now. So let's go to the next slide. And all right, so this comes out of the Policing Practices Ad Hoc Committee, and I'm going to give a really high-level framing here, but I'm also going to invite ad hoc committee members to share any of their perspectives or anything that I might have missed after this quick overview. But you all will see this in the recommendations document itself, but I just wanted to re-emphasize kind of what this document and what these recommendations are speaking to specifically, because they are pretty narrowly tailored. And so the first thing is that the Policing Practices Ad Hoc Committee is recommending that Metro phase out of the contracted law enforcement model. And that recognizing that that phase out is going to take some time, that they would move to put in place an interim policing contract. So keeping the same type of contracts in place, but understanding that that is kind of a way for Metro to stand up another system for law enforcement on the system. And so these recommendations are tailored towards that contract specifically, that interim contract, and what ad hoc committee members would like to see incorporated as part of the scope of work that Metro puts out to local law enforcement agencies. So just want to be really clear that these are specific to an interim contract. And then the last piece is that the committee is still working with Metro to explore what options are on the table for that law enforcement model and what will ultimately replace the contracted law enforcement model that's in line with the rest of the committee's vision and recommendations for public safety. So I want to pause there to see if the ad hoc committee members have anything to add, or to see if I missed anything there. Okay. Now, any questions from our general committee members just about this overall frame? Okay, then let's go to the next slide, and we want to give you all just some time to digest the recommendations. You've seen the ad hoc committee's recommendations. Metro shared their responses to those recommendations. So we'll pop the link to those updated recommendations that now have the ad hoc committee and Metro's responses all in one. Let's give it 20 minutes for folks to read and review that document, and then we'll come back and do some Q&A through each of the sections. So let's just get that in the chat there to share with everyone for the updated recommendations. And then we'll come back at 5:50 to start the Q&A session. I'll give you all a heads up at 5:48 with a 2-minute warning. Happy reading. And this is your 2-minute warning, folks. We'll come back at 5:50. All right, folks, it is 5:50, so hopefully everyone has had a chance to review the updated recommendations doc, and we can move into our discussion. Again, just a reminder on process, we'll be running through our usual 6-step process here for these recommendations tonight. And so let's start out with discussion here on the next slide. And before we walk through section by section, just want to see if there are any overall comments or questions. So first I see a hand from Clarence.
Yes, thank you, Richard. Just reading through it, I do, for as far as recommendation number 8, as far as my concern for individuals who are disabled or have an ailment at the time, often it's instance of conflict to where officers are forcing someone to lay on the ground or sit on the ground. And the issue of that is always the claim of non-compliance, which in a lot of the instances is used as an excuse to physically try to control someone, force them to the ground, or force them in a certain position on the curve of the ground. And it's a strike at someone's dignity. An individual, they're not a suspect. They should not have to sit down, be forced to the ground or on the curb. And if they do choose to ask someone to sit down, if they can, they should not be asked to sit somewhere where it's not proper to sit. Myself, as a disabled individual, I'm often not able to sit down or stand up for too long. I have to go in between the two. I have to get up or sit down for so long, stand up for so long. Or some days I can't even sit down for a few seconds. So I do think we need to further go into that.
Okay, that is something that we can come back to. We talked about the specific contract provisions. Thank you for.
And also number 23 for the K9, but we can go into discussion to that later.
Okay, perfect. Any other general questions, comments, or flags folks want to raise?
Yeah, Richard, I'd like to say something. Regarding the return number 13, the recommendation to non-contracted law enforcement services. I mean, I was surprised a little bit. I respect all the recommendations that, fellow committee members made, but I was surprised to see that there because I know there's been a lot of talk about layered approach. And I think it references that in Metro's response and a couple different sections. I think we'll definitely obviously have to spend some time talking about that, but there's another section where it talks about basically funding everything to need. So I still don't, at this point, I don't understand why we have to cut certain areas or propose to cut law enforcement or security or anything to fund mental health when we can just fund mental health if the funds are there. I know that's easier said than done often, but there's a surplus in the state. There's probably a surplus in the county. It's a huge need. So I think, those are my comments on that. I don't think it should be, necessarily right off the bat, cut this to, cut here to reallocate the funds there, and then one area suffers. I think we need to balance it out. That's just my opinion. Again, I respect the recommendations, but I definitely disagree with several of these. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Daryl. Anything else before we get into the specific sections here? Okay, then let's move into our first major section of just guiding principles here on the next slide. And so this is really kind of an open forum here. Again, I'll ask folks to keep questions and responses relatively succinct, but we want to give an opportunity for both ad hoc committee members to share a little bit more about the rationale that inform the recommendations, and if there are specific questions for Metro about their responses to go here. So we've got these kind of 4 major categories here. So let's start with the law enforcement model. That is recommendation 1, 1A, and 1B. Any questions, comments there? Okay. And we can always come back to the things if something comes up later. But for now, let's move to funding and resources, especially to Daryl's point just there. Recommendations 2 and number 3. So recommendation 2 about the long-term vision of shifting funds, and number 3, ending Metro's practice of reimbursing local law enforcement agencies for special events. Questions or comments there? Mayan, go ahead.
Thanks, Richard. So I'm curious from Metro's response, if you guys could speak to if there's anything in the contracts right now about reimbursing for special events and enhanced deployments. I think this is one of the things that kind of came up in the last couple of months with these like really big reimbursements that had to occur that needed board approval. So is there something existing like this already? I wasn't sure from the response if that was the case. Thank you.
Richard, would you like me to respond?
Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. This is Judy Gerhart. So in the current contract, there's a total contract value. And so as these expenditures were occurring through over the course of the first several years of the contract, they were still within the overall contract of value that was within the law enforcement contract. So there wasn't an over expenditure of funds. And I think it's really important to note that the funds that were used for these special events or enhanced deployments were operations that were approved by Metro. So it wasn't, I want to make sure that there's a clear understanding that this wasn't law enforcement deciding to go do special events or operations and then charging Metro. These were all approved by Metro for law enforcement to do these special events or enhanced deployments. But what happened as the end of the contract neared last year, they recognized that there wasn't enough funding within the existing contract value to cover what was approved by Metro. That's why we had to go back to the board to seek that additional funding. But we recognize that we all could have done better. We should have monitored that routinely through the course of the contract and recognized early on through those expenditures that we weren't going to have the necessary funding to cover the remaining portion of the contract. So that's why you'll see here that we want to commit to monitoring that consistently through the contract, and that any overtime charges will be approved and reimbursed through Metro. But they have to be approved by Metro in order to be reimbursed. I hope that makes sense. And for the special event overtime, that's not part of the contract. So I think that we've talked about this before. We don't provide law enforcement services for special events now within the existing contract because it's not budgeted there. And if in the future that's something we want to consider, then they're going to have to be a separate line item and a separate funding source for special events.
Thank you, Judy. Mayan, it sounds like that clarified things for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we're still on funding and resources. Daryl, I just wanted to circle back on your point before we get to Jose. I think you were referencing specifically recommendation number 2 related to shifting funds currently used for law enforcement. You don't have to answer this now, but if in chat you have anything that might that you might want to propose as a modification, let us know. Let's go to Jose.
Sure, thank you. I've worked the bus bridges when we've had to work on rails on the trains, and the contract security and also law enforcement, for that matter, has been instrumental in assisting the field supervisors in directing traffic to the appropriate buses, locations, trains, and even giving them directions. And it's kind of an ongoing maintenance effort on the part of Metro to maintain, upgrade, and improve the train service. And so maybe Judy, if I'm wrong, go ahead and correct me, but sometimes the overtime and the funding goes, part of it anyhow, goes towards that personnel to help with the amount of crowds that we see, so we can hopefully minimize the disruption and improve the overall customer experience and reduce the impact to a minimum. So that's just kind of my take on perhaps utilizing the overtime in a wise and a cost-effective manner, which we have been in the past. Thank you.
Follow up, Judy?
Yeah, thank you, Jose, very much. I appreciate that you recognize that we can't plan for all of the events that may occur out there. And so it's important that the law enforcement contracts have some flexibility within those contracts. And we really work with our law enforcement partners so that they can operate within their existing deployment whenever possible. So they may rearrange or reassign personnel to cover those unexpected events that might happen, like a bus bridge or something like that. And they do have a small amount of overtime to give them some flexibility, but those expenditures all have to be approved through Metro. It's not something that they have free reign to go and do whatever they want with. All of those expenditures are approved by Metro.
All right. And Clarence, I think you're going to close us out on funding and resources.
Yes, I just want to in particular what Jose was saying, as far as the needs of traffic or crowd control and things of that nature. And as a person who was a security guard myself, that often leaves security, as far as them in particular, that leaves them distant from their purpose, which is observe, report, and also there's other aspects. But I think that reinforces support for transit ambassadors to help with those things, as far as crowd control, directing people and assisting people. I don't really think that's a function that should be seen as a function of security.
Great, thank you, Clarence. I saw a hand from Maricela, but it's also disappeared.
I won't belabor the point. I just wanted to say that I was basically going to say what Clarence said. I'm personally not in favor of removing all law enforcement, especially sworn officers, as opposed to non-sworn. It does seem, so I appreciated the definition of event, because in my mind, it was fun events. And clearly that's not what was just explained to us. So I appreciate that. And that doesn't sound to me, and I'm not an expert, but it doesn't sound like somebody has to have a gun to direct a bus. And again, I'm not an expert. I've never been part of a bus bridging event, but it seems like those would be good use of somebody else's time.
Right, let's go over to Chauncey, and then Judy can follow up.
Committee members and then the subcommittee that came up with these recommendations, a lot of rigorous thought and analysis went into it. And I think when the subcommittee was drafting these recommendations, they were really thinking about a whole host of factors, right? I think one key thing that came to my awareness in developing the recommendations is that in the recommendation about funding and shifting resources from contracted law enforcement to alternatives, what the subcommittee is proposing is not for a removal of law enforcement altogether from public transit.
Chauncey, you're starting to break up. We can still hear you, but you're starting to break up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming in a little muffled, but we can hear you.
So I'm saying that through the committee deliberations, what was being proposed is not a removal of law enforcement over time via phase out. It's merely a phase out of the contracted services, if I recall correctly. And so, for example, if the LAPD or the sheriffs or the Long Beach Police Department is operating within a particular jurisdiction and something happens near public transit or on a train, they can still go to it because they're on duty and they're doing their jobs as employees of the city or county that they're working in. However, the difference under what the committee is proposing is that over time, what we'll do is phase out the use of Metro funds and resources to pay for those services that they're already supposed to be doing as part of their jobs as public servants for the city or county that they're working within. So that's one key clarification. And I think another important point to keep in mind is that by saving these resources for duties that they should already be responsible for covering, will free up a whole host of funds to pay for this broader ecosystem that's being offered up by the non-law enforcement alternatives group. So that includes a robust transit ambassador program. That also includes using up those freed up resources to pay for homeless outreach, You know, hundreds of $1 millions to go towards behavioral health clinicians, folks that can help out unhoused people. Just the other day, we heard a great presentation from a nonprofit organization, I believe it's called Cryalysis or something like that, about the work that they do, help people get jobs and things like that. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of added context, because I think the natural inclination when you first like read the document or hear, it's like, oh, they want to take police away, or, you know, it's like a on and off switch. But that's not really what's being recommended here. It's merely a shift in how we go about funding these sorts of services that law enforcement are responsible for engaging in.
Hey, thank you for that clarification, Chauncey, and seeing Marcella there. Giving a +1 Pat. Judy, I believe you had a quick response, or maybe related to another item.
I can certainly touch on this one if you'd like. Let me first address Marcella's comments regarding crowd control and special events. So depending on the nature of the event or the nature of the crowd, sometimes it is necessary to have a law enforcement presence, simply because a large crowd can be, we just need to be careful that we have the appropriate eyes and ears on that crowd to make sure that we have law-abiding citizens doing the right thing at the right time. And primarily in what the example that Jose was giving, those bus bridges, those are generally done by Metro Transit security teams. They're roving teams that go out there to assist in incidents where people that say the train has stopped and they need to get from point A to point B, and they have to have a bus bridge. So Metro Transit security is a resource for the operations to assist those people to move easily to their next destination. I just want to comment real quick, if I may, on Chauncey's comments regarding law enforcement on the system. I think it's important to identify that it is true that if there were no contracted law enforcement on the system, that the local agencies would respond to emergency calls. But I think what we need to recognize is today we have 600 law enforcement officers that are out there on that system for prevention and deterrence, and to respond to non-emergency calls as well as priority calls and emergency calls. And so the difference is we have 600 dedicated law enforcement officers to the safety and security of the Metro system today. And that includes bus security, it includes mental health evaluation teams, it includes detectives. And so we have a whole system of law enforcement that comes with these current contract models that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Okay. Clarence, Maricela, are your comments related to the funding and resources item?
Yes.
I would like to move this along if possible.
Mine are, and I will be brief, but Clarence can go first.
All right, if you can be
After you.
super quick so we can move this along.
Okay, I'll
I'm
go ahead.
referring-
Okay, so
Go ahead, Clark.
just to go where Chauncey was going with this, and as a compromise, which which is painful, I'm willing to make, would be not necessarily elimination, but a drastic reduction of contracted armed law enforcement. Also, in addition to, I think, thinking about crowd control, as Judy was saying, and special events and where it is needed, especially for visual purposes, I think designated traffic control officers, as well as traffic and fine dedicated officers, could be a great source to use that as a different method versus a more full-on approach and apprehensive measure to detain or enforce against the public, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Clarence. Over to Maricela.
I really want to thank you, Judy, for your perspective. And I simply want to provide a glimpse of a different perspective. You mentioned two things. One was crowd control, and one is prevention and deterrence. I feel that there is a very distinct difference here in philosophy. As a person of color and as a queer person, as a person who lives in a lower socioeconomic neighborhood, I will say that here is where implicit bias and the reasoning for law enforcement that you gave in these two instances concerns me, because people of color, Black people in particular, but I would say people of color in mass, and also queer people. When we talk about crowd control, by whose standards are we judging? So even if, I've been in situations where I'm at a park in a less affluent neighborhood, and, police are absolutely trying to control the crowd's behavior. I've been at the Hollywood Bowl for Philharmonic Symphony and had people very calmly tell people who were not Black or brown and in the expensive section not to smoke marijuana in public before it was legal. And so, those are two situations where you have a crowd who may not even be doing anything illegal, and someone attempting to control behavior. And then you have instances where behavior that may be illegal is not controlled. And so I would just ask that Metro staff really stop and think about these rationales from the point of view of the people who are trying to be controlled. And I know that for me, that feels like a really big police presence. And also, I would say in terms of prevention and deterrence, again, I think that is just something I disagree with. I don't think that police prevent or deter. I think that they respond. And as somebody who, I'm home with my two young girls, if somebody broke in right now, I'm going to call 911 and want them to respond. I don't think the fact that they exist is what's keeping someone from breaking into my house right now. So again, I would just, I don't know. It's those two things that really concern me about the rationale. Thank you.
Thank you, Maricela. All right, let us move on to oversight and tracking, where we're speaking specifically to recommendations number 4 and number 5. Sub recommendations under number 5. So recommendation number 4 related to a community oversight body for all contracted law enforcement and Metro Security Services. And recommendation number 5, looking at tracking mechanisms to track incidents involving the police and other non-law enforcement responders. Any questions or comments on those specific items? Ashley, let's go to you.
Yes, I just want to do 2 things. So my question to number 4 is, and this is a clarifying question. So my understanding of it as it's written now is that there will be no additional oversight committee than the already established ones. And so my question is like, what kind of additional plans does Metro have in mind in order to accommodate for like the additional new legwork that's currently not being done, like any additional resources, any additional time, because it seems like it'll be kind of pushed off onto the law enforcement, but I'm not sure how does Metro plan on supporting the new work that needs to be done. That's one question.
If I understand the question correctly, I think that you are asking, in addition to the law enforcement agencies that have their own current oversight, how will Metro ensure that Metro has an opportunity to have oversight as well? So if I understand that question correctly, as stated in the recommendations, I think we have existing oversight functions, both from the Metro Board. We report, as you know, to the Operations Safety and Customer Experience Committees. Internally, we have the Office of Civil Rights, we have the Office of Ethics, and we also have the Office of the Inspector General, who, although we work very closely with the Inspector General, she actually works for the board. So she is not a Metro employee. She works directly for the board, and she has oversight, as well as, of course, of our CEO, who has ultimate oversight of what's happening within Metro.
Thank you, Judy. I think my question, it gets at a larger theme that also I'm struggling throughout this meeting, is that my understanding is things aren't working particularly well right now. So like the current oversight committees that you have are great, but there's still something lacking, and that kind of pushing off this additional work, it's gonna fatigue people even faster. It's not really an answer to the problem. Going off of that, I just wanted to briefly respond to the idea of bus bridging, and share an anecdote. I was on the bus coming home from LAX, and there was a huge traffic stop at several stops, and we had to get off the train and do a bus bridge, and it was the most chaotic, confusing, terrible. It was also raining, which added to the drama of the incident, but it was very dark at night, and I ended up at 7th Street in Metro trying to find a bus over there because there's a lot of bus connections, and just happened to find 2 other people who were also on the train who decided to walk together. But there was the idea of like, I can't believe the transit staff being called and being able to quickly be deployed and respond to a bridge incident. It may be working on some parts of the system, but for overall and the majority, it's not working for all parts. And so it just seems like a little bit of, I think it goes to Maricela's point of like, Metro's responses are not really acknowledging the parts that aren't working. And like to round out this comment, the committees that you have are great, but obviously they can't take on additional work because they're not really fully functioning as they are right now. So I think it's unreasonable to assume that they would be able to do, and same with the police, like the police would, or excuse me, law enforcement would be able to take on this additional responsibility without any additional help. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, Ashley, I really appreciate your comments. And I think that what I'm struggling with is when you say it's not working, I'm not exactly sure I understand what that means, because certainly we always want to do better. We evaluate constantly how we're doing, what we're doing, and what we can do better. We always want to do better. And so I hear you saying that it's not working and we need to fix it, but I'm not sure what it is. And so I would challenge you to really explore that. And if you, and of course not at today's meeting, but if there's a way that we can really hone in on exactly what isn't working so that we have the opportunity to address that, I'd really appreciate that, because we want to be the best that we can be for the people that we serve. And so if we can identify those areas that we can improve and give us the opportunity to improve them, because I think if we say generally they're not working, it doesn't give us really anywhere to go. And so we really work closely with those other offices, the Office of Civil Rights and the Office of Ethics and the Inspector General, to continue to evaluate how we're doing things, the feedback that we get, and what we can do better. So I hope that you'll really think about that and share those ideas with me, because we really want to be the best that we can be.
All right, and since per usual, we are coming up on time here, let's go to Chauncey and then Daryl, Clarence, I'm going to ask you to hold just because I think you've already spoken on this specific one. So Chauncey, let's go to you.
Thanks, Richard. I like to echo the sentiment provided by Ashley here. Appreciate Metro's response to the recommendation, but from my perspective, the response seems slightly, if not significantly, misplaced. So here you see that what the subcommittee recommended was a community oversight body. Keyword community, right? And similarly, the IPS subcommittee recommended a community oversight body. In response, what we're seeing here from Metro, it seems to be some form of a disconnect with what the committee's offering up and what the people of Los Angeles and the board called for, which is community input and oversight in creating PSAC. So here, as Judy mentioned, it says Board Operations Committee, Civil Rights Department, Office of Ethics, Inspector General. Those are all governmental entities. So that's, I just want to make that clearly distinct, Judy. That's misplaced and it doesn't actually align with what the subcommittee here and for police practices and also the subcommittee on IPS was offering up as a recommendation. And then in terms of what's not working right, Ashley says things aren't working. And you said, well, what's not working? Well, I'll say what's not working with the current system in place is that the issues of public safety that have persisted for decades continue to persist. So people continue to be concerned about their safety, whether it's their perception of whether they feel safe based on just the environment around them, or whether they actually are being harmed, right? So the current model is broken. And it's even more broken when you consider the fact that the current system in place disproportionately harms people of color. So for example, the data show that Black people are over 50% of riders who are cited on Metro for fare evasion, and over 50% who are cited by Metro more generally. However, by contrast, they don't even make up close to that amount when it comes to ridership, right? So significant racial disparities there. And if you think about the fact that they only make up like less than 10% of the overall population within the county, to say that over 50% of the people who are being cited for things just shows that they're being criminalized based on their status as people of color, and all too often low-income people of color who can't afford to pay these tickets. So they're being cited, and it amounts to entrenched poverty because they can't afford to pay these tickets, and it just becomes a vicious cycle. So that's just one example of what's broken, right? The current system, which doesn't work in terms of outcomes for safety, which is why PSAC was created. And then two, it's harmful in a disproportionate manner to people of color.
All right, thank you, Chauncey. Let's go to Daryl and then Florence to wrap us up on this item.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the oversight and tracking, just some thoughts. Response times came to mind. You know, I know I've heard response times, concerns over that brought up in several meetings that I've been in, you know, ad hoc meetings, general meetings. I think, you know, that's part of, it sounds like what could be improved on. It's probably something that could always be, you know, improved upon. But I don't, going back to the previous point I was making, I don't feel, just from my perspective, that there's a lot of confidence that that would improve if we went away from the contracted model. So that's another reason for my rationale behind bringing up that I would be opposed to that. Continuity, I think, should be tracked. I think going back to when we were asked to approve an extension or give our viewpoints on that. And sort of part of my opposition to that was, the lack of what seemed like to me, part of it was continuity. Part of it was also just the way the contract was managed and the utilization, and there was some issues there. So, but I feel like some kind of continuity as far as the law enforcement presence, regardless, on the metro system, some focus on that and seeing where we're at with that. I mean, I don't know where that is. Is it constantly rotating, sheriff deputies, police officers? Does it always change? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of that, but I think it would be good to get more, drill down more on that and see if there's a way to work with the current infrastructure and improve that. That's just some, thoughts on that. And then also, I just think, there was a lot of work put into this by the ad hoc and by Metro's response. So I wholeheartedly appreciate that and respect it. And I just think one of the bottom lines to me, the way we can improve things in general and the contributions we can all make and moving forward is just to collaborate more, frankly, to have more, collaboration between law enforcement agencies, regardless of who handle this work, and Metro and the, mental health service providers, break it down across the spectrum. We have to find a way to, enhance what's being done right now. And just the final point is, one last thing about what's not going right. And it's an unfortunate point, but I know there was somebody who lost their life recently, waiting at I believe a bus stop. It certainly isn't one person's fault or another, an agency's fault or another. I'm not suggesting that, but I think, and it's one case, but one is too many. And that, I think, should highlight to us again that we need to take a long look at this, and maybe one meeting's not enough, maybe we need a couple, but I think we need to really keep working on this together. So thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. Over to Florence.
Hey, my question is to Judy. With the oversight, I'm a person that if there is a problem, then you got to come with the solution. And I feel that one, as Chauncey said, is like there was a reason for PSAC being formed together, and out of that reason, an oversight commission is not something that comes to tell you what to do. And one of the things, I am a member of NACO, which is the National Association of Civilian Oversight. And one of the great stories, and maybe Metro could connect with them, is the BART system in San Francisco, which has an oversight commission. And many Metro, I don't want to say Metro, but many transportations are thinking about civilian oversight in large areas, and so is New York. And one of the things is what Daryl said. It's about collaboration, and I think that maybe a group of us who are very maybe interested in it, it may not be something, because Metro may look at it and say, "Oh my God, I can't start another community thing," but you already have a group of people in PSAC who are interested and who are invested in this kind of work, and may not be the community oversight, but could be the committee that could do the research. As I was in NACO in Tucson at the conference this year, there was many research and ad hoc committees from around the country, and NACO has law enforcement, it has citizens, it has IPAs, it has lawyers, that are all really interested in this subject, all trying to figure out how police and community can challenge one another and really be accountable to one another. So it's not a win-win or a lose-lose, but it's about a community growing and thriving again and having the safety levels that you've talked about so many times, being very present in the conversation. It's not about you did something wrong, so we're going to take it away from you, but it's like how people have been saying tonight. If something isn't working and we need to find a solution, then let's put some pause and say, what are other things going on? And I suggest to Metro, and I suggest to everybody to maybe think about in this oversight commission, thing that look at some of the entities that are working around the country, but definitely look at the BART system, because the BART system came out of a death and is very, very, very workable. And I just think that if instead of this tension that I feel that we have, is that it's about coming around the table and, like Daryl said, and collaborating, but collaborating with some ideas and some solutions. And it's not because we say it's that way, so it has to be that way, because we don't know what we don't know. You in Metro and everybody in that office really know the system. You know the ugliness, you know the greatness, and you know the excellence, and you also know the pressure. And there's things that we just don't know. But if we can really be a little bit more vulnerable, then I think that this oversight, or maybe even some of the other stuff, the tracking, could be saying, as oh my gosh, I'm not going to say her name wrong. Maricela said, was that when you see people of color, and what is directed is that all those different areas in the Metro system have the same equity. And I think that's what everybody's looking for, is equity. So that's just my 2 cents, that I think Metro should have a research in NACO and see how it could fit for Metro without giving you guys extra work. And there are people on PSAC that I am very sure that would step up and say that they would help in that creation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Florence. I will share your comments with the CEO, all of your comments about this topic, but I just want to remind you that within the statement of work, what we can include is what we require of our potential law enforcement partners, and to accommodate this recommendation the best we can within the statement of work. We do want to acknowledge that we are recommending that we do include that each of the law enforcement partners that are under contract with Metro do have such an oversight commission developed as part of their agency, as part of their jurisdiction. So, but I will share your comments.
But can I say though, the LAPD, which you have you do have a contract, has an oversight commission, which is, you know, the LA Oversight Commission. Long Beach, I do not know if they have an oversight commission, but the reason why it becomes fractured when you say piece it out to different oversight commissions is because then it goes back to what Chauncey said, or somebody else said, is that when you piece it out, it never becomes a whole for Metro. And if you want it to be a whole for Metro, then the question has to be, there has to be an entity that is not looking to discipline, but is looking for all these metrics and all this data. And another thing that is into play, and let me just say that RIPA is coming about. And because of RIPA, which started at the 1st of January this year, which is collecting data under the assumption of, for the DOJ, for every ticket or every interaction that a policeman has, right? That what is the data going to come at? Is there racial biasing? Is there this? And the worst case scenario for Metro in this situation would be that, as Chauncey said, the data comes out in 2023 that shows that Metro data shows that from their law enforcement, from LAPD and Long Beach, that their interactions are higher with people of color than anywhere else. And I think that should be thought about, and it's an elephant in the room, because RIPA is about to rip into a lot of assumptions that people had and give us some real data in 2023. So thank you.
Richard, I think we've lost your sound. No, still nothing.
Okay, am I coming through?
There you go.
Excellent. All right, sorry. Transition from earphones to not. Let's wrap on Metro policies, and then I just want to do a gut check with the group on kind of where we're standing and how we're feeling about moving forward on these recommendations. So just quick thoughts on specifically recommendation number 6 here concerning use of force. Metro's use of force policy, having the agency develop and implement a use of force policy that applies to all Metro staff, contracts, law enforcement, and security personnel. So any questions here? Chauncey and Florence, I assume those are old hands. Okay, folks. I am looking at the clock and what we still have to get through tonight. We've got specific contract recommendations, and I just wanted to do a quick kind of gut check with our committee members here. If folks can raise their hand or put it in chat if folks feel like they're comfortable weighing in one way or the other tonight on this full set of recommendations. Are you all in a place where you feel like you can approve these recommendations and take a vote on it? Or do you feel like there needs to be more discussion? So how about folks put it in the chat, whether you think we can move forward or whether you feel like we need some more discussion on these items.
May I ask a clarifying question? So if I think my colleagues did a great job. Oh, sorry, camera. I think my colleagues did a great job, and sometimes Metro disagrees. I still might be in favor of something, even though I understand Metro's response. So we would wholesale approve or wholesale disapprove, right? That's what you're asking, regardless of Metro's response.
Right, so you'd be approving the ad hoc committee's recommendations.
Okay.
So yeah, folks just want to put it in the chat, and I'm doing this only thinking we've got 20 minutes left. I did want to circle back to our IPS firearms discussion if possible. Okay, I'm seeing lots of ready to approves, or at least ready to move to a vote. So how about this? Let's have 5 more minutes of just Q&A, especially for those of you who have concerns. This would be the time to raise those. And let's take 5 minutes and then let's move this forward just for a vote on the ad hoc committee recommendation. So does that sound like a plan? Okay, I see a hand from Esteban.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you. I reiterate thanks to the ad hoc committee members for their work on these. I have a couple of questions, but I'll ask one and keep it brief. First, on item 22, the recommendation is the contractor should not engage in any anti-terrorism operations or proactive terrorism prevention activities. So my question is it's a two-part question. First is if they could just, anybody on that committee could explain the reasoning for that, and two, what then vis-a-vis Metro's response, where this is a responsibility of the system, what would approving these recommendations then mean for this one that seems like it's a non-starter because of Metro's response? I hope that makes sense.
I can hop in here. Actually, Mayan, I defer to you because you were on the ad hoc committee.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in and kind of give a little bit of context for that recommendation. So basically, as part of the subcommittee, we were trying to kind of come up with parts of the scope of work that we felt were not like directly engaging in responsive activities. So the kind of like proactive policing, a lot of the like the stuff around kind of presence, we felt that could be those same types of end results could be accomplished by different bodies, essentially. I think part of the reasoning around specifically the kind of like the this like the more data driven like crime analytics stuff is that a lot of times there's a lot of bias in this data, which ends up leading to more biased policing practices as well. If Mohammed is on the call, I feel like he can speak to that. He has just more expertise in this, but that's kind of the like 3,000-foot view. If any other subcommittee members have additional comments that I may have missed or things I may have said incorrectly, I invite you in. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayan. And I think the second part of your question there, Esteban, is that ultimately these recommendations, like all of your recommendations, go first to the CEO. The CEO then presents both Metro's recommendations and the committee's recommendations jointly to the Metro board, and ultimately the Metro board is the one who decides on a direction forward. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. So I guess that just means that it's okay that there's no problem with including recommendations on the part of the committee that conflict with or rather that are not God, what's the word? That are not implementable, right? Because according to Metro, that's one of their responsibilities is anti-terrorism, right, Richard? That it's just not that it's up to then Metro to take it or leave it, ultimately, which is the case. Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing then. Thank you, Mayan, for your clarification. I'm wondering though who that would fall to then. Maybe I missed that in your response. Who we would recommend this fall to? Anti-terrorism. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, Mohammed can speak to this better, but I think in our subcommittee, he's brought up a lot of concerns around like the validity of like policing to prevent terrorism. I see Florence's hand is up, so I'm gonna step away because I'm probably messing things up right now.
Oh no, you're not. You're not. Carry on.
That was about it. But Mohammed has a lot of, and this is like this is his expertise. It's his day-to-day work. So I kind of feel like uncomfortable trying to summarize the insight that he brings in. But I think the concern there is that the policing for terrorism is often used as an excuse for racial profiling and other kind of like increased surveillance and increased methods of like oh my God, I can't talk. Using, just getting into it, privacy concerns, things like that. I have COVID. I can't talk right now. I'm gonna just put myself on mute again.
Thank you, Mayan, and wishing you a speedy recovery. Let's go Florence and Chauncey, and then I'm doing last call for questions here so that we can wrap things up.
Okay. I want to say this to the whole group. Yes, I'm on the ad hoc committee for the policing, and I have a consensus, or I have a belief like that I've rolled in the way that our group has wanted to, and so not all of these recommendations do I, wholeheartedly agree with, but I understand the heart and the intent of where they came from. And I am more in a layered approach, and I am more in, let me say this in a way, I'm not so much in agreement with Chauncey as leaving it up to the area to do it. Because the area police are going to concentrate on their streets. They're going to concentrate on their community. And even if somebody calls you on the train station and says, yeah, we need the police or whatever, it's still going to take a minute for that police to start reacting and learning in a way that, okay, we need to get down to whatever train station. So I know it has to be a led approach, and it has to be a culture of training for our local police to even understand what it means to add their metro districts into their policing. And so there is that level placed on that. And that's what I will say, but I will still go back to say what I said to Judy is that having some form of oversight for, if you are a service, and Metro is a service to the whole of Los Angeles, and you give a service and everywhere through your recommendations, you read that they want to have a layered and safety approach to our community and our residents, then the one entity that is so prevalent to this, which is the police and the enforcement of the police. And if you will never, probably ever take out the policing contracts, but we'll have them in some form of way, whether it's Metro's own police or outside contractors, then as a service, you should have an entity that is accountable only to that part of the service, which is the safety of the human side of getting people to and from wherever they need to go. So that's what I wanted to say, but I'm in consensus of moving forward and letting the CEO present the recommendations.
Thank you, Florence. And over to Constance, who had some questions in chat.
I didn't realize I was Aaron Weinstein tonight. So I'm like, oh, I'm Aaron. Yeah, and I guess actually Florence just pretty much like summed it up, because I wanted to know about 16 and 17. I was a little bit confused about the response, or who would be the response, or how we would go about that. Or if that was like on the ambassadors, but I think we've kind of discussed it. So I'm good. I mean, if anyone wants to add anything, they can, but I've heard a lot.
Okay, and in that spirit, I want to move us along here in our process and get to a test for consensus. Sorry, I'm not moving us along correctly. Let's first open it up to public comment on approval of the ad hoc committee's recommendations for the policing contract. Thompson, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Richard. So now we're going to move into public comment on this specific agenda item, which is the policing practices ad hoc committee recommendations. If you're joining us on the computer or on mobile, go ahead and use the raise hand function. If you are calling in by phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself when called upon. Comments will be taken in the order that they are received. We are also opening the chat box so that commenters can provide written comments. Please, we just ask that you submit them all in one message. So again, now is the time for public comment on this specific agenda item, the policing practices ad hoc recommendations. Last call for public comment. Okay, Richard, there are no public comments on this item.
All right, so the proposal before the committee is to approve the policing practices ad hoc committee recommendations for the forthcoming law enforcement contract. Let's go ahead and test for consensus on this. Similar to the IPS firearms vote, does anyone have concerns about moving forward with a vote on this item? I see a hand from Esteban.
Sorry, Richard, just if you can clarify. So on the screen, it says, do you agree with the committee's recommendations? Is that what we're testing for consensus on, or whether we're moving forward with the vote?
So we're testing consensus on whether or not we're moving forward with a vote on the item.
Okay.
So, yeah, so if you do have concerns, but you're willing to stand aside to let the vote proceed, then that's fine. If you have concerns and feel like this is just something that we should not pick up tonight, then part of our consensus process has us kind of stop there to go back to modify.
Okay, I think we can move forward. No concerns.
Okay, and I think I saw a hand from Carrie as well.
Yeah, you answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. All right, folks. Not hearing, last call for any concerns? Okay, then let us move this into a vote. So you will be approving the ad hoc committee's policing contract recommendations. This one you'll be voting yes to approve, no not to approve, or abstain. So Thompson, I will turn it over to you to take the roll call on this.
Thanks, Richard. We'll go in alphabetical order. Andrea?
Yes.
Ashley?
Yes.
Carrie?
No.
Chauncey?
Yes.
Clarence? Clarence?
I see a yes in chat from Clarence.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Constance?
Yes.
Thanks, Constance. Daryl?
No.
Esteban?
No.
Florence?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Maricela? Maricela? Okay, we'll circle back to Maricela. Mayan?
Yes.
Mohammed is absent.
Sorry, I'm here and I'm a yes. This is Maricela.
Thank you, Maricela. Dr. Howard? Okay, still absent. And Scarlett?
Yes.
Okay, just one moment while I tabulate the votes. And that is 10 yes votes to 3 no votes. The approval passes.
All right, folks. And in our last 3 minutes here, let's go back to the IPS firearms recommendation. We're going to do a revote on slide 23 there. So here, voting members, you're being asked to either vote for option 1, to gradually to reduce the number of armed IPS personnel starting with this next contract. That's option 1, gradual reduction. Option 2 is immediate disarmament. So to disarm IPS personnel as soon as the new contract is instituted. Or the third option is to abstain. The last time we voted, we had 4 votes for number 1, 5 votes for number 2, and 2 abstentions. We need at least 8 votes for a majority to approve an item. So we'll take it to roll call again. Thompson, over to you.
Thanks, Richard. Andrea,
Abstain.
Ashley,
Number 2, option 2, thank you.
Carrie,
Number 1,
Chauncey,
2.
thank you. Clarence,
Can we come back to me?
okay, I'll circle back to you. Constance,
Option 2.
thank you. Daryl, Daryl,
Option 1.
thank you. Esteban,
1.
Florence,
1,
James,
1,
Maricela,
1.
Mayan,
Option 2, please.
Mohammed is absent. Dr. Howard is absent. Scarlett,
Option 2.
thank you. And circling back to Clarence.
Option number 2.
Thank you, Clarence. Okay, one moment while I tabulate these. All right, Richard, we have the same result again. We are 6 for 1, 6 for 2, and 1 abstention.
All right, folks. Democracy in action. No majority there, so there is no official consensus on the, or no majority rule on the committee. But thank you all for giving it careful consideration and following where the data and the information and presentation guided you. Okay, so y'all got through 2 votes again tonight. Congratulations. Next steps, per usual, are that we will draft an outcomes memo documenting where folks landed so that the CEO and Metro staff can present this alongside the rest of the recommendations. And so to close us out, we will move to public comment.
Thank you so much, Richard. So we'll go ahead and start with our written public comments. Looks like we just lost our timer. So let's go ahead and I'll be timing on my side. We have 1 written public comment from commenter Wilkes. So commenter Wilkes, you'll have a minute for me to read your comment aloud starting now. I've been a regular rider of LA Metro for 8 years, and public safety has deteriorated drastically in the last 6 months. I've had to defend other citizens from violent individuals. My 4-year-old and pregnant wife have been forced to breathe secondhand meth smoke, and obviously there's been no enforcement of the mask mandate. In this time, I've not seen a single trained public safety professional on the trains. These are anecdotes from the last 3 months alone, and I suspect they are consistent with your data. Offending individuals have been various ages and ethnicities, but all have been men, pretty clearly under the influence of meth. On an evening eastbound E-line train, 2 men board the train who appear high around Bundy. One has a metal baseball bat and begins harassing a woman. The situation escalates with the man menacing her with a bat and threatening to kill her. Some fellow riders try to intervene. This is happening in the front car, and others rush to the conductor's window and begin banging on the door, yelling to pull the emergency cord. This is at the Palm Station. Thank you there for your commenter, Wilkes, and we have received the written comment. Let's go ahead and go to our attendees. So attendees, this is general public comment, you can use the raise hand function. You may also, if you're calling in by phone, you can go ahead and dial *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself when called upon. Looking for general public comment from attendees at this time. Last call for general public comment. Okay, I have a comment from call-in user 3. Please go ahead and unmute yourself. You'll have a minute for your comment.
Yes, I'm a member of the public, and one of the things that's not working well is I'm an avid viewer of local news, and there has been, I understand Metro is responsible for the transportation to and from, but many incidents currently, criminal activity occurring is when passengers are going to utilize public transportation or if they're on the transportation. I'm not asking you to go use the money to hire a public agency for your public image, but there is some disconnect. I have not seen any representatives of Metro when the reporting of the criminal activity is occurring, any statements. And I don't want the boilerplate statements, but I just haven't seen, I've seen news agencies, law enforcement, passengers being interviewed, and I just haven't seen any Metro representation. And in terms of some of the money being used for law enforcement, I don't know, this is a biased statement because I walk around with a vagina. So that puts a huge target on me. But if a fellow passenger is pointing a flamethrower at me, at that moment, I'm not concerned about, is there a job training program available to this person? And I don't want law enforcement assisting passengers from a train to a bus. Please appropriate law enforcement where they need to be. Thank you.
Thank you, commenter. And last call for general public comment. Okay, no more comments in queue. Richard, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Thompson, and thank you, committee members, and for participants in this meeting for joining us. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, February 2nd. We will see you all then. Have a good night.
Night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.